Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sex is Medicine. I am your host, Miss Devi Ward Erickson, Tantrika extraordinaire, and I am so honored to have you here with me again this evening. We broadcast live every Thursday evening, not every Thursday evening, the first Thursday of every month. We used to broadcast live every Thursday evening, and I still have that in my mind patterning here. So the first Thursday of every month we broadcast live, so you can catch us here on Contact Talk Radio Network. And to find out about the latest episode, catch the replay and sign up for updates, you can do that at deviwardtantra.com or authentictantra.com. I am so excited to have a dear friend and very esteemed colleague here on the show this evening to share with us her view about monogamy and talk about the monogamy detox, what that is and why that's important for many of us in intimate relationships to have more understanding and more awareness around the toxic patterns of monogamy and how that can cause suffering. So my guest this evening is Mel. Mel, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name in a way that isn't obnoxious. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Devi. So my name's Mel Cassidy, and I'm a relationship coach.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so I met Mel. I know Mel from beautiful BC, and I met Mel, I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, speaking at an event, and I was quite starstruck by Mel. Your vocabulary, I don't know if I ever told you this, but your vocabulary was like erosis to me. It was wonderful. It was very titillating. And so I was enthralled by Mel, and I wanted to know more about her and who she was and what she was about. And Mel was presenting on the topic of polyamory and multiple relationships. And so tell me about that, Mel. How did you get started in the field of polyamory and talking about, people in relationships and being a relationship coach?
Oh, that's a good question. First of all, you're making me blush. I'm equally starstruck. So someone asked me the other day, how did you become a relationship coach? And I don't actually know how to answer that. It's the sort of thing where you just, when you trust that flow, you just follow, and people start coming to you with those questions, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is something I need to pay attention to. So I can tell you how I started off in polyamory and in non-monogamy. I mean, I was one of those people who was a total romantic all through my teen years. Like, I would just have all these kind of like Disney fantasies about, one day my prince will come and all of that stuff. And when I was 22, I did what a lot of 22-year-olds probably should think twice about doing, and I got married. I got married to the first man I'd had like a real sexual relationship with. And we were together for a number of years, but even when we got married, I said to him, like, I know at some point I'm going to want to explore with other people. Like, I knew that I was bisexual. I knew I was attracted to women. And I knew that I might want to explore with other men as well. And the discussion kind of ended with this, like, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And eventually the time came, 6 years into our marriage, where I was facing a spiritual crisis in myself about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to be living my life. And I realized that the life that I had been living wasn't actually authentic for me. Mm-hmm. Like, even if I went back into my high school experiences of dating, I didn't just crush on one person. I had crushes on lots of people, and I didn't date anyone because I thought that if I started dating someone, then I'd have to stop crushing on all the other people I had a crush on.
Mm-hmm. So are you of the orientation that some people are wired for monogamy and some people are wired for polyamory? And so and polyamory meaning many loves.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, I feel that polyamory is one particular way of doing non-monogamy.
Okay.
But I do think that there's an argument to be made for relational wiring, that we might be wired to be more monogamous or monoamorous, versus many loves. And I think that, yeah, when I look back at it, I think I've always been wired to engage in multiple relationships. The challenge is that our society structure is not set up that way.
Yes, very much not so. And something that you said is very curious to me. So you define polyamory as one way of doing non-monogamy. So
Mm-hmm.
for our audience, let's define that. So what is monogamy specifically in this conversation? And then what is non-monogamy, and what are some of the variety of ways that could show up for people?
And monogamy is defined as lifelong pair bonding. And if you look at how biologists write about mating habits and so forth, the a lot of animals are, they're all, not a lot, but some animals are monogamous. They form lifelong pair bonds. I love the hyacinth blue macaw is one of those birds that is a monogamous pair bond, and they are together for their whole lives. Non-monogamy is anything that's not that.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean that you don't form lifelong bonds. It doesn't mean that you don't have moments of being coupled, but non-monogamy encompasses anything other than a exclusive, lifelong pair bond.
And is that exclusivity reserved to what you're doing with your genitals? Because that seems to be the thing, is when we're talking about monogamy or polyamory or whatever, non-monogamy, it all has to do with who you're sharing your genitals with. And if and if you're only sharing your genitals with this one person, then you're monogamous. And that it doesn't matter if you're loving, if you're in, have heart connections with lots of other people, but it's what you're doing with your genitals that's important when defining your relationship structure. Is that what you see too?
Well, what you're talking about is something that I consider to be part of what I call the monogamy hangover, which is all these, the toxic, heavy ideas that we have about monogamy that are based in an illusion and in like a story we've been sold and aren't actually true. So this idea that sex is the primary marker of a relationship, that's nonsense, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of people, they consider monogamy to be about sexual monogamy.
Mm-hmm.
In the book Designer Relationships, which I love and I recommend to everybody all the time, it's by Mark Michaels and Patricia Johnson. They're fantastic because they're both biologists and they're Tantra educators. And I love that they bring these two worlds together. And they talk about how there's 4 different kinds of monogamy. And I like to expand on that and look at it as 4 different dimensions of how we relate. So they talk about sexual monogamy. They talk about emotional monogamy. And that's one thing that, as soon as you bring that into the conversation, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I'm totally emotionally non-monogamous. Like my best friend, I wouldn't have sex with them, but like they're bigger in my heart than my partner is.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about social monogamy. So that idea of, the power couples that might appear together as this cohesive unit, but they maybe aren't sexually monogamous.
Mm-hmm.
And then they talk about practical monogamy. So I think about that in terms of the way that we nest and we build our lives together. So, some people will choose to share a home with a partner, share finances, maybe even start a business, but that doesn't mean that they're being emotionally monogamous, sexually monogamous, and socially monogamous as well.
Yeah, those are really great distinctions to have. The sexually monogamous, the emotionally monogamous, the socially monogamous, and then the practical monogamy. Because it seems like in our culture, we try to put all of those together.
We do, and we start with this idea. I think the way that society encourages us to do relationships is kind of backwards. So I see it as you've got these 4 layers of a cake. At the top, you've got awareness. And then underneath that, you've got safety. And then deeper than that, you've got intimacy. And then right at the bottom, you've got relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we get ingrained in us about how to go about relationships. And I think this happens as a result of media and just what we see role modeled for us there. We start off with this idea of relationship. We're like, oh, I like you. Now we're dating. Now we're in a relationship. And then we expect that because this person is someone that we're having sex with, that there has to be intimacy. And then we have this expectation that, oh, well, if we're being intimate, you have to feel safe with me. You have to be vulnerable with me. And then this expectation that over time, we're going to learn more about each other because we're doing all that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's kind of backwards. Like it's a script that comes with a lot of obligations, a lot of expectations. And I like to turn it around and go, what if we start with awareness? What if we start with that seed of curiosity? And then you build what's possible. And when you're building what's possible, you're never having to compromise at any point. You know, so many people start in relationships and only, you know, a few years into it realize, oh my goodness, there's this huge incompatibility between us. And it took us 3 years for the conversation to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think of it very, very much like the way we go about having friendships, right? Non-sexual relationships are structured just like you're talking about. It's like, oh, you meet each other, like, oh yeah, let's get to know each other and let's go and have tea and let's have conversation. And you find out you spend time with each other because you are compatible, because you enjoy each other, because you have similar interests, shared worldview. You know, there's all these other, you know, needs that are met in this friendship, and you're just not having sex. But again, when we add sex to the equation, it's like that's the starting point for so many people. Yeah. And then, you know, discover down the line that, wait a minute, I don't even really like you.
Yeah. And you know, that's not to discredit great sexual relationships. Like you can have a fantastic sexual relationship with someone who you don't have the same political views as, or don't enjoy the same music, or the same kind of social scene, or you have completely different lifestyles. Like that doesn't exclude the possibility of a great sexual relationship.
Yes, and that the thing is being able to keep it in that box, so to speak. Not that I want people to put things in boxes, but you know, in that it's like being able to acknowledge, okay, so we have a great sexual relationship, but that doesn't mean that we need to be dating or we need to be married or you need to come home and meet my parents. It's just we have really good sex, so let's keep having really good sex and maybe have some of those other needs met. It seems like there's the by trying to be monogamous, it forces this relationship structure that isn't necessarily natural in every case.
Yeah, totally. So there's this piece of the monogamy hangover which comes into like why do we do relationships? What is the purpose of our relationships? And the standard model is that relationship escalator model, which is like you were saying, as soon as, well, we're having great sex, so you have to come meet my parents. Like, why is that where we go to? And there's a lot of our personal value and self-worth that gets tangled up in that. You know, we're taught from a very early age, and I think this may be more so for those of us who are raised as girls. We're taught how much our personal value is tied to being on that relationship escalator, to having that partnership. It's a mark of you are now a successful grown-up. And if you fall off the relationship escalator, there is a cascade of shame, and that shame doesn't even need to come from anyone else. That shame can come from inside of you. So I fell off the relationship escalator very dramatically. You know, going back to your question about, you know, what's the difference between non-monogamy and polyamory. So my first experiences were in a dishonest form of non-monogamy. I cheated on my husband. And, you know, while I inherently knew that I was wired for non-monogamy, I didn't have the tools to go about doing that in a healthy and integrity way. Mm-hmm. And I fell off the relationship escalator. And there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of fear about, what do I do now? How do I make this work? And someone introduced me to the word polyamory, and all these lights went off. It was like, oh my goodness, wait, there's a way that I could do this with honesty, with integrity, and actually have long-term meaningful relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And that was super exciting to me. And then, of course, as soon as I started doing polyamory, I found myself subconsciously getting back on that relationship escalator again. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, I could live with all of these people. Or, having those same kind of Prince Charming fantasies, but just with multiple people now instead of just one.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my monogamy hangover coming in pretty strong.
So I want to hear more about the monogamy hangover, but before that, I want to circle back to what we were just talking about. There are the different forms of non-monogamy. So in your research, in your study, and professional, awareness, what are some different styles of non-monogamy?
Okay, so we talked about polyamory, and then there's the cheating. Cheating is a form of non-monogamy. It's a dishonest form. There's also swinging, and that can be that an individual can go to swingers parties, but usually it's couples, or at least that's how the culture has emerged. And in that, you're not breaking the practical monogamy or your social monogamy. Maybe there's a little bit of emotional connection if you have a group of people that you're swinging with, but you're engaging in sexual non-monogamy. And it's with the consent and knowledge of everyone involved. Mm-hmm. But it's not developing long-term romantic relationships. It's mostly focused on the sex and community. There's definitely a lot of community that comes about through swinger culture. So there's swinging. There's also just general open relationships where, and this kind of encompasses a very broad sphere of things, where people may have some agreements, they may have some rules around how they go from being in a couple to dating outside of that. It tends to be less intertwined and involved than polyamory. In polyamory, I find that people are interested in making more bonded connections and more commitments. Mm-hmm. And then there's also polyfidelity. So in polyfidelity, people are taking some people describe it as multiple monogamy. You're basically making commitments with multiple people for the long term and not dating outside of that.
So what about in my experience, not just in Tantra, but even before Tantra and, kind of like the subculture of polyamory, there's something that I like to call polyfuckery, which... which was, just like dudes who wanted to have the freedom to have sex with whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, with absolutely no commitment or no emotional accountability whatsoever. So the word polyamory, because of that, has kind of gotten a bad rap in some social circles because, and I guess it's a judgment, but having been on the receiving end of it, the polyfuckery, it's like, wait a minute, dude, there's no personal accountability or conversation. It's literally just about having sex with as many people as possible. And then if you express emotions, you're catching feelings, and that's like a negative thing. So what is your view on that? Because the way you describe polyamory is like multiple loves. That's very different to me than just polyfuckery.
Yeah, I think that we do need to start having more conversations about this difference between polyfuckery and polyamory. And I think it doesn't happen because people don't like the F word.
Well, come on, people, we're all adults. Don't you watch cable?
Yeah. I got censored once on a radio show in Vancouver for saying polyfuckery. Anyway, but there's this kind of, I've heard some people who are definitely doing that polyfuckery model say, like, you can't stop me from doing this. This is how I'm wired. This is who I am. And I'm like, okay, maybe you're wired for non-monogamy, but you've got a choice about how you do this.
Yes.
And I think it's so important that we be responsible with our sexuality. In sexuality is one of the most potent ways we have of connecting with other human beings. And it's the most deeply vulnerable way that we have of connecting. And, when we are exploring our sexuality in a way that is emotionally guarded, I mean, I say this as someone who's been there. When I see that happening with someone, I get really curious, like, what are we guarding ourselves from? And there's a piece where I think that sometimes in exploring our sexuality, in exploring this amazing buffet of non-monogamy, we can fall into bypassing our own deep emotional and spiritual work through the pleasure that is on offer, right? That pleasure can be intoxicating, and it can become a distraction just as much as it can actually serve our self-growth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so beautifully stated. And that's something that I've intuited as well. And I know, speaking for myself, I've gone through polyamory and non-polyamorous relationships, and I don't really define myself as anything except for the relationship that I'm currently in, which I think I'd define as like open monogamy. Right? We don't date other people, but I'm not going to get into the details because he doesn't want me to, but we're monogamous, and except for a few instances. But coming from a background of what I would call a serial monogamist, right? So I would have relationships that would last like 3 to 6 months, and then it would be like, I'm out, or they'd be like, I'm out. So because of the length of time, lacking in the ability to evolve into a deeper place of intimacy, right? So my, attachment traumas would come up, or their attachment traumas would come up, and then boom, we'd be out. So what I found in being married now in a monogamous structured type of relationship is that, and for a couple of years now, is that those places where I was afraid to go or could not go before, in my other, relationships, I'm able to dive into a deeper level of healing and self-awareness, and also awareness of like, I hit this certain point where it was like, in the past, it was so easy to blame, like, oh, well, you're just not a good fit for me, or, oh, you're ugly, or whatever the excuse was to not love this person. I'd hit this block to intimacy, and it was all about how I couldn't go deeper with this person because of the person. But what I've discovered in my marriage to like the most perfect person ever for me is that block would come up, and I'd be like, wait a minute, but he's not ugly. He's a perfect match for me. So this must be me. This is my block to intimacy. It's not about him. And my whole life, I was able to make it about my block to intimacy about that other person, as opposed to about me having a block to moving more deeply into intimacy. And so I'm sharing all of this because watching some of the patterns in polyfuckery and all of that, it just keeps coming to mind, like it keeps this block in place to moving more deeply into intimacy, and anytime that comes up, it's like, oh, you're catching feelings, I'm out. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I think that we see that happening in different kinds of relationships. Like, I think about whenever somebody is getting squirrely in a connection, there's something that they're afraid of.
Yeah.
And what is it that we're afraid of? And I do believe that on some very fundamental level, we know that the story we've been sold about how we're supposed to do relationships, that, you find someone you have great sex with and then it's happily ever after, we know that that's bullshit. We know that that isn't actually authentic for us. And we know that we want more than that. Mm-hmm. There's got to be more to that story. I look at how society measures or how we're taught to measure being in a successful relationship. And there's a lot of toxic ideas in that. And we get into a relationship and we don't see those things happening, and we start to freak out and panic. Or maybe we get into a relationship and we don't want those things. Like, we don't want to have a lifelong commitment with somebody. We're too much of a free agent. Or maybe we don't want a lifelong commitment with this person. Does that mean that we don't love them? Does that mean that we have to be cruel to them and not care about them? Right? It's really hard for us to reconcile what's authentically happening in our hearts and our souls when we're in connection with this template that we've been told we have to fit our love into.
So what are some of those toxic views about monogamy, monogamous relationships that you're referring to?
Okay, so I'll start with the purpose of relationships, because we already started to talk about that. So that relationship escalator being tied into, you are successful, and then your personal value along with that. Like, you are now a successful grown-up because you've you've succeeded on the relationship escalator. And, you keep being a success so long as one of you dies before the other.
And then you have to die like a week later to show your love and devotion to this person.
Exactly. And some people, for some people that does work. But, I think are we consciously choosing that for ourselves or not? There's also this belief in the one that I think limits a lot of us. So a lot of people have had an experience of being completely blown away by a connection. And maybe it was just glancing at someone across a dance floor, or maybe it was something that was sexual, or maybe it was just an amazing heart connection with a stranger who you never got to meet in person. And you go, oh, I've never felt this way. And I feel that belief in there only being one person that you can feel that way about really limits us, because to me, and I'm a spiritual person, to me that recognition that comes up, that's about recognizing our divinity. That's about recognizing the inherent beauty and gracefulness that is in all of us. And we have the capacity to recognize that in multiple people. Yeah. But we need to be sure that we're not falling into a relationship escalator just because we recognize someone's beauty.
Yeah. So so relationship escalator. I want to tease that out just a little bit more to make sure that I'm understanding that. So relationship escalator, I know it has to do with success, but what other components are that?
So it would, you start dating someone, and then it's like that autopilot trajectory where you start dating, then eventually you're going to meet each other's friends, each other's families, then you're going to move in, maybe you'll get married, you'll have a dog, a cat, you'll go to IKEA together.
Okay, got it. Yes. Okay,
you'll retire and move to Florida, like all those steps.
Absolutely. Okay, got it. Got it. Yes, the natural progression. I found that when I was getting married to my husband, and everyone were like, "Oh, are you guys gonna have a baby?" And I'm like, "Dude, I'm 42. That ship has sailed." We're like, he's got 2 teenagers. We're not having more. I'll get another cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those presumptions of the way it's supposed to go, the way the relationship is supposed to unfold. And then I would imagine that causes suffering, because relationships don't always work out like that.
They do not. And, when you go into non-monogamous relationships, you will have people who have you start to encounter someone else has a different idea of the relationship escalator. So some people are more coming in with their, that monogamy hangover very apparent still, and they're working through, how do I recalibrate my expectations? And then there's someone else who's come in who's already adapted their relationship escalator model to a model of polyamory. So it's like, we're going to start dating, then you're going to meet my other partners, and then I'm going to meet your other partners, and then we'll have an orgy together, and then
Okay, yeah, so there's relationship escalators regardless of your relationship model.
Yes. Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
So that all of that falls under the purpose of relationship, like why are we doing it? And then it starts to bleed into a little bit about what and how we do it. So, there's other expectations. I like to talk about the 2-headed monster, like in Sesame Street. They complete each other's sentences, and it's this idea that in a relationship you're now joined at the hip and you have to do everything together. And, I have to acknowledge there are some relationships where people have an amazing working relationship. They can do a lot together, and they're incredibly creative and productive that way. But that's authentic for them. When we are tying ourselves into this expectation of, I have to glue myself to my partner, we have to be one and the same, we're limiting ourselves, and we're playing into either codependency or ownership dynamics about relationships. And what happens in that is, we lose our authentic voice. We end up compromising. And any healthy relationship is going to have some kind of compromise, right? Person A wants something. It's not person B's thing, but person B can stretch to meet that, and vice versa. But when both people are existing in that space of compromise and no one's needs are actually being met,
yes,
it it's so draining. You're putting out all this energy for something that you don't actually authentically want, and no energy is coming back. And that's where you see people in relationships that have been going on for longer, and they look kind of grumpy and tired. You know,
Yeah.
that fatigue and that tiredness is always it's a clue for me that people have been falling into that idea of we have to compromise on everything.
Yeah, I'm feeling that in my body. That's so toxic. Because instead of doing stuff out of like a sense of joy and like, life enrichment, you're doing it out of a sense of duty and obligation because you think you should. And
Yeah.
that is degenerative. I mean, yeah.
And one of the things that I work with my clients is that, how do you tune into what feels good for you? And that difference between this is for me versus this is something I'm willing to do for the other person, and recognizing when we move from a place of being willing to being tolerating to being enduring.
Yes.
A lot of this detoxing from the monogamy hangover revolves around that process.
That's beautiful. So you're launching a program soon called the Monogamy Detox. Could you share what people are going to get from that, and like how that unfolds for us?
Yeah. So the Monogamy Detox is a 6-week program, and it's online, and there's live calls every week, and there's also course material that you get to download every week. And I've designed it as a lifelong access program. So once you've done it once, you can continue to repeat it every time it comes up, because like any kind of detox, it's not just you do it once and you're done. Mm-hmm. You're going to do one layer, and then a few months later you notice that there's something else that's come up, so you can go back and repeat it. So with the Monogamy Detox, there's 2 focuses in there. One is so that everyone can start to recognize what your own individual monogamy hangover looks like. So recognizing what are the stories that we're carrying about relationships, what are the expectations we're holding, how are we measuring success in our relationships, and then starting to just bring awareness to that. And then the second part of it is replacing those scripts with something that is a template, which allows you to build something that's more authentic for you. So rather than a relationship escalator, which feels very mechanical, I like to think of it as a relationship landscape. And in this relationship landscape, there are many different textures that we can explore. There's, going back to those different kinds of monogamy, I like to think of these as different ways of relating. What do you build in your landscape for emotional connection? What do you build for social connection? What do you build for your practical connection? What do you build in your sexual and pleasure connections? And we work through this together as a group, and it's an incredibly sweet program. It's been beautiful to see, the students who've already gone through that, how their relationships have shifted. And some people have had some really profound shifts through it, because as soon as you start to really do that work of examining all the stories you've held about monogamy, you start to see all the other stories that you've held on to. And I've seen some people shift dramatically, not just in their relationship landscape, but whatever happens in your relationship starts to ripple across your whole life. It's really, really beautiful.
And so do you find that this, because what you're describing, it sounds like it would be amazing for people who are in monogamous relationships to help them have better relationships?
I like to say that this course is for anyone who's ever felt burnt by the ideas around monogamy. So if you've gone through a difficult breakup, or if you've gone through the bereavement process, the loss of a partner, or you've gone through a divorce, or you're opening up a relationship, these are all points where all the ideas about relationship are challenged. And we have to look at, well, how do we go forward? How do we move through this? Years ago, I worked at a dating service, and I would talk to clients who were in their 40s who, they married their high school sweetheart, and now they're divorced, and now they're dating again for like the first time in their lives, essentially. And they don't know how to do it. And they were grappling with a lot of sorrow and a lot of grief. about having to let go of what they thought a relationship was about. So this course can equally support people who are in that space. It's not just for people who are exploring non-monogamy or polyamory. It's really for anyone who has felt that the standard cultural monogamous script just doesn't work for them.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And so for people who are interested in exploring non-monogamy in a way that's healthy and productive, this would be good for them as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of the, I mean, aside from obvious things like jealousy and, I don't know, communication, what are some of the other obstacles or issues that come up when people try to move into the realm of non-monogamy?
Well, I think that this is one of the big ones that I see happen is the monogamy hangover is still influencing their behavior. So there's still this expectation that, sex is the most important thing in our relationships, that this expectation of I have to be perfect at everything, otherwise you're going to leave me. I've also noticed in non-monogamy, there's a sort of fear triangle, which can start to happen. So, you have partner A and partner B who have an existing relationship. New person, partner C, comes along, and partner C might fear that they're going to be treated disposably because they're the new person on the scene. Partner A, who's not in a relationship with partner C, has a fear of being replaced. And then partner B has this fear of hurting the people that they love and care about.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how much I see that happen again and again in non-monogamous relationships. And I've seen it in my own relationships too, right? Mm-hmm. It's those fears start to control us. Mm-hmm. And then we start to limit ourselves because we're afraid of making the wrong step or messing everything up. And I think that a really important part of relating is giving ourselves permission to make mistakes and to be kind with ourselves and others to repair from that when we have mistakes happen, because we're human. And we didn't get taught about how to have relationships in high school. The only models we've been given for how to have relationships have been very unhealthy.
Yes, agreed.
And a lot of us are figuring this out in adulthood, and it is not perfect.
Yeah. And then, the research that I continue to do in the realm of trauma, it's like, oh my God, we're all walking around with some kind of attachment trauma. And the best place for that to be played out is your most intimate relationship, you can guarantee. So we're bumbling around, trying to have relationships with no tools, or the tools that we get, the information that we get is incorrect, right? And then we have all our attachment trauma coming up, which is like, from birth. Those are some intense things. Those are intense emotions. Those are survival, right?
And I feel like when people go into non-monogamy, they're doing that in a very intensive way, because you don't just have one connection now, you have multiple connections. And so trying to find sanity in that is really important to access that. And that's something that I really, my vision is that we can have a world where people can relate authentically without shame, without fear, without pain. Amen. And I'm really committed to creating these tools and offering these tools to people so that they can do that. Whatever way those relationships look. However it works for them to authentically be and be experienced, I want people to be able to do that in a grounded, supported way so that each person can feel empowered to recognize their own experience in that, rather than, because I think if we don't, then we are just going to create this tangled maelstrom of stuff that gets very messy and very challenging.
Yeah, well, and suffering, and it's like Buddhist philosophy is inside, outside, same, right? So I really look at that. I take that to heart. It's like, okay, my own internal experience, but then okay, so my relationship, my most intimate relationship, and then my, the next stage of relationship and the next stage of relationship. So if we're in this constant turmoil inside of ourselves and constant turmoil in our most intimate relationships, then how are we going to be shiny, happy people holding hands on this planet? You know, the planet's in turmoil because of relationships, essentially. So having support and guidance and tools about how to relate to each other in a way that's healthy. And you know, for me, it all starts with how we relate to ourselves.
Yeah.
That's for me, when I began relating or learned how to relate to myself in a healthy way, I was able to then have healthy relationships with other people. So beautiful. It's so important to have tools, access to tools, because what we learn in this culture is the antithesis of this kind of stuff, of what you're teaching.
And I think that, you know, one piece that comes out of this, doing this monogamy detox process, is you start to realize how much richer the possibilities are in your relationship landscape, so that you can connect deeply, even in those relationships that are not sexual.
Yes.
And going back to like the state of our world right now, there's so much individualistic stuff happening, and people grabbing resources and this scarcity, and you know, if we can let go of that, if we can learn that we have the possibility of being supported in a landscape with all these different kinds of connections, we don't have to get that all from one person, that we have a much broader possibility of community available to us.
Yeah, and being in a healthy relationship with our environment, you know, and all the living beings here with us.
Yes.
Yeah, being in a healthy relationship. Wonderful. So how can people learn more about this program that you're launching and get the support that they need?
Yeah. So the website is monogamydetox.com. And all the information is up on there. Registration is open. The course is going to start up on September 5th. But I do have an early bird special. So if you register before August 15th, then you get a complimentary 45-minute coaching session with me, one-on-one. And I found that that's an amazing treat to go for yourself, because you get to do the monogamy detox, and then you get to have this one-on-one session with me. So we get to go over more of the, like, what is really going on for you. And, you know, is there somewhere that you're stuck, and how do we get you out of that place where you're feeling stuck? So yeah, registration is open now, but if you go and register before August 15th, you can get that early bird special for the complimentary 45-minute session. And I'm going to offer a discount for anyone who's listening to you, to me, to us talking here today. You can get 25% off the registration price with the code Sex is Medicine.
Wow, that's amazing. Look at that. You're so on top of it, making up codes. So I love it.
You know, it matters to me that this work is available to people. And so as well, like if somebody is like listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I really want to do this course, but I don't know what I can afford, you can also just message me. Send me an email. All my contact is on the Monogamy Detox website, because I'm committed to making this work available for whoever wants to do it.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I encourage you, if this resonates with you, to absolutely reach out to Mel. I hold her in very high esteem. She knows her shit.
Thanks.
I've seen her in action. She knows what she's doing. You're in expert hands here. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Mel. It's been a juicy conversation as always. I love spending time with you. And thank you all for listening and watching our video. This is a wonderful thing that we get to do, film live as we're doing the show. And if you want to stay connected with me, you absolutely should between shows, because once a month is certainly not enough. You can sign up for all of our amazing, wonderful free ebooks. We have some good content. I've been a busy little Devi writing away at authentictantra.com, and stay connected with us on social media. We have all kinds of juicy tidbits that we put out to you. Authentic Tantra on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And last but not least, our registration for the Authentic Tantra Certification Program is open right now. From now, August 1st until September 15th, you can take advantage of our early registration bonus, which offers you $3,000 in savings. So I'm not going to give you the whole spiel about it now, but I am going to encourage you to go to our website, authentictantra.com, and find out more about our certification training program. If you are interested in a credible and comprehensive training program in the field of Tantra, we are the only accredited school for Tantra in North America, accredited by the American College of Sexologists International. So if this is your life path, then I encourage you to get on it. Y'all have a great evening, and I will be with you live next month. Much love, many blessings. Peace out.